I'm Aubrey Sitterson, and this is SKALD. You're listening to the only story that matters, and there's absolutely nothing else like it. Every week, I write a brand new episode, and then I record it in one single, flawless take. SKALD is serialized, but don't feel like you need to go back and start at the beginning. Instead, just dive in here. It's the best episode of the show yet. Afterward, once you're hooked, you can catch up on what you've missed by going back to listen to previous episodes or by picking up the prose volumes on Amazon. Or you can just keep plowing ahead with the current episodes, since there will be a brand new one waiting for you next week. This isn't me reading you a story. This is me telling you a story. This is SKALD, part 91. Maul clung tenaciously to life. Not because he loved, enjoyed, or treasured it. No, it had been years. It had been lifetimes since he had savored his existence in the world, since he had known anything but pain, agony, hatred, loss, and resentment. In that moment, with his shattered mind aching, its broken pieces grinding into what was left of his soul, what hadn't been bartered away, traded as part of grisly deals that never failed to disappoint him, never failed to lead him further and further away from his goal, from what he deserved, from what was rightfully his. In that moment, writhing upon the stone floor of that degraded, crumbling tower, he no longer wished to live. He no longer wished to struggle, to fight, to kill, to slaughter, to take, and to endure. He was tired. He'd had enough. He'd seen enough, done enough, and now he wished to fall weightlessly into that inky black void of nothingness, an abyss so wide, so deep, and so dark that one never stopped falling through it. One fell through the vacuum until their mind had become completely unraveled, until there was no sense left in their body to remark upon their situation or even their very presence. And then, and only then, would it all mercifully be over, finished, complete. Maul was ready for death, but not solely because he was tired. He had always been tired. For as long as he could remember, he had been exhausted. His earliest memories of the elf realm, ordered to run and to lift and to carry, anything to drain his bottomless reserves of energy, those which the elves believed to be the source of his unruliness, of his delinquency. They had believed that if, like a dog, they simply wore Maul out, then he would become docile, compliant. But they had believed wrong, and Maul had never become compliant. But now he was assailed, not just by exhaustion, not just by an all-consuming weariness of the world and what it had taken from him. No, he was under assault by guilt. Guilt at allowing his one friend, his one true friend, his companion, she who had been by his side through everything, who had never betrayed him, who had always been true, for allowing her to be beaten, to be slaughtered, and to be devoured. So now, when set upon by her ghost, by a deadly black shadow of her form, by a murderous shade bent not only on revenge, but on ensuring that Maul joined her in the darkness, in the inky black void of nothingness, he found himself unable and unwilling to fight it. But still, Maul clung tenaciously to life. Because being willing to die and choosing to die are two very, very different things. And for Maul, though he had been born with an iron will, one which had been blasted and refined through his lifetime of suffering, one which had been rendered a gleaming, unbreakable steel, though in what remained of his shattered, broken mind, he knew that he wanted death above all else, that he wanted to be flung into that inky black void of nothingness, to join her, to join SKALD, or be forever punished by solitude, though he wanted it more than he wanted anything, more even than he wanted what was his, what was rightfully his, more than he wanted his throne. His broken mind could not force his body to obey. His shattered psyche could not force his body to simply lie there and suffer that relentless assault, those brutal, bloodthirsty attacks, while he could successfully command his arms to cease their swinging, while he could drop that grisly, blackened and notched cudgel, the one still stained by the witch's blood, while he could refrain from doing what would have come so naturally to him, what would have been so easy, while he could refrain from reaching out and seizing that giant cat beast's throat. He could not allow the inevitable to occur. Instead, his body rolled and turned instinctively, keeping his most vulnerable parts away from the cat beast's slashing claws. He cried and he wept as madness took him, as the pain of the beast's attack, as the agony of knowing that even now, in the jaws of death, he could not be free of the torture that had followed him throughout his life. He cried and he wept and he called out for mercy that would not come, as he was driven further into madness, driven deeper into lunacy by the excruciating suffering that he now endured. The cat beast attacked him over and over, biting and tearing with its teeth, ripping Maul's flesh to ribbons with its claws, cutting so deep that it touched the shifting, angry runes beneath his skin, the eldritch blue sigils that cut through the crimson gore that covered the savage. And when the cat touched them, when its claws brushed against that ancient, forbidden magic, sparks flew out, and that beast, the one Caleria called Umbra, the one she had rescued from the trunk of that imposter world tree, she recoiled in horror. But the respite the cat beast gave to Maul was only momentary. It was over as soon as it had begun. And rather than drawing strength from it, rather than renewing his resolve, Maul was cast even further into madness, his death wish intensified as he was reminded of what it was not to be inundated with agony, was reminded for a too brief moment before the cat beast's relentless attacks and the excruciating pain which they damned him to all came rushing back. As much as he wished for death, he could not find it. It would not be given to him. And with that thought, he heard a laugh, a devilish, sardonic laugh, one taken with sadistic glee, one that came from a hungry, flaming, rictus grin that spoke to him in a voice that toppled mountains and that fractured worlds, but one that only he could hear. No, Maul, I am not done with you yet. And as he listened to that grating voice, like an ocean of glass smashing against a rocky shore, he saw that massive cat beast open its mouth wide, its white teeth in shocking contrast to the endless black of its thick, rich coat. He watched as the creature opened its mouth wide, but not to feed, not to clamp its teeth down upon Maul's neck, not to mete out vengeance for the murder of her master, not to deliver the death blow that Maul was so eager for, but rather to scream. The cat beast let out a blood-curdling howl, an awful, horrible scream, made more terrible by how closely it resembled that of a human in agony, a human who, so close to its goal, so close to what it needed to accomplish, so close to what it deserved, what it was right to strive for and destined to achieve, the scream of a human that came within arm's distance of his goal, only to have it ripped away, the scream of a human at death's door. Umbra reared back and flailed as blood spewed forth from its neck, gushing out from her jugular in a violent torrent, forcing its way out and around the long, twisting, rusted and filthy knife that sat there, mocking the cat beast as it struggled to dislodge the weapon. And in that, at least, Umbra was successful. She succeeded in shaking the blade free, succeeded in getting the awful weapon out of her, succeeded in hastening her own demise, as without the dagger in place, her lifeblood poured out all the more quickly. Maul watched in horror as the massive cat beast, the shadow, the ghost of his beloved SKALD, fell awkwardly onto its side. Watched in panic-stricken terror and guilt as the monstrous cat beast's screams turned to howls, turned to cries, turned to pitiful meulings. He watched in rage and fury and hopelessness as once again his pet, his companion, his only true friend, the only one that had never abandoned him, watched as she did indeed abandon him, watched as she left him, watched as she was taken from him once again by his failure to do as she had always done for him, his complete and utter failure to protect her. Maul sat up slowly, but as quickly as he could. As quickly as he could manage after the attacks his body had weathered, after the madness his shattered mind had succumbed to. He sat up, and he scrambled to his feet, eager to go to her, to go to that vicious, monstrous cat beast, the one to whom he owed everything and had condemned to nothingness. But as he crouched there, preparing to make the final ascent, to force his wounded body, covered as it was in open, weeping wounds, to force it unwillingly into an upright position, he heard a familiar voice. "You should have waited for us. It seems that even a destroyer can need assistance." Maul turned his head in the voice's direction, and as he did so, his one remaining eye, already red with burst blood vessels. It now filled with something else. It filled with an all-consuming fire, a hungry blaze, a cathartic flame, the pulsing core of madness and rage and destruction that sat at the center of Maul's very being. And no sooner did he turn than he laid his eye upon the speaker, laid his eye upon that deformed, limping embarrassment, laid his eye upon that pretender to a mockery of a throne, laid his eye upon the vermin prince. Maul rose, and he watched as the vermin prince hobbled his way across the room toward the long, rusty, filthy knife that laid upon the ground, drinking in the cat beast's blood, drinking in the blood of a creature so noble that the vermin prince shouldn't have been allowed to even look upon it, much less strike it, much less drive his disgusting blade into his flesh, much less slay that magnificent beast. I see that you did your part of the bargain already. I suppose it's only right that after you saved my city, that I save your life. The vermin prince turned with a wicked smile upon his face, expecting to be greeted by Maul's gratitude, by heartfelt words of thanks, or, at the very least, a grunt of approval. But all he saw was the savage, the brute, that oaf, the destroyer, charging toward him. He barreled artlessly into the vermin prince, sending him sprawling across the floor. And before the vermin prince even landed, before his knobby, twisted back made contact with the hard stones of the tower floor, Maul was upon him. He had left his cudgel behind. He didn't need it. He allowed the grim weapon to continue to lap up the blood that now coated the floor from wall to wall, to drink up that potent mix of sanguine fluid, of witch, of cat beast, and of destroyer. He didn't need it. All he needed were his hard, calloused hands, the hands stained red with blood, the hands that went directly to where they belonged, where they had been before, where they should have stayed, to the vermin prince's thin, wrinkly neck. The vermin prince sputtered, pleading for his life. But Maul couldn't hear. He couldn't hear anything but the roaring between his ears, a roaring that he was eager to get out, to let loose upon that falling, dying city. So he opened his mouth, the better to let the noise, the sound of horrible, crackling flame, to let it out of him, to provide a release for his torment. When he opened his mouth, the only thing that came pouring out was blood. Thick, sticky, and hot, unnaturally hot. It steamed and it boiled as it cascaded out of his mouth, as it fell down upon the horrified, blubbering face of the vermin prince. And as the blood poured out, more blood than he could have possibly still contained within him, could have still held within his ruined body after all that the cat beast had taken out of him, as the blood gushed out upon the horrified, terrified vermin prince, Maul found his voice. And he began to scream. "You killed her! You killed her again! You kept me from her, from what I deserve! You kept me from that inky, black void of..." Maul's ranting, his tirade, was interrupted. It was put to an abrupt halt as a blinding, searing pain struck his shoulder, like a lightning bolt hurled by the gods themselves, cast down by those disinterested deities, the ones who so rarely deign to make their presence known, to become involved into human affairs. The burning struck his shoulder, but quickly spread out, its fast-moving tendrils wrapping themselves around Maul's body, subjecting him to a physical torment far worse than any other he had experienced in that tower, to an affliction that made the cat-beast's attacks pale in comparison. The flame, one he recognized, one he knew intimately, it wrapped its 8 arms around him in a torturous embrace. And it squeezed. Maul shook, and his entire body convulsed as his hands loosened their grip upon the vermin prince's neck. His back arched, and he made to howl out in agony, but the voice, like the death he courted, like the death that he had hoped in that instant for the pain to bring him, it did not come. With his body still racked with the aftershocks of that anguish-inducing strike, distracted from his mission, distracted from his quarry, distracted from his mission, he stood and he turned. With murder in his eyes, he turned to find the foolish, unlucky soul who dared to strike him, to strike the one true king of men, the one true king of flames and ashes. King Maul. Maul's one remaining eye, filled with hate and fire, was met by a cool, frightened, yet confident glance, one that rocketed out from a pair of clear, bright, disconcertingly green orbs sitting with an aligned, exhausted face. It was the face of a man who knew exactly what kind of destruction he was capable of and had a steady hand enough to deal it out. It was Master Ho. Maul, still distracted by the agony that had gripped him, still distracted by that vicious, terrible blow, the one that could have only come from that long, blackened spear, the one with the sickening red veins, the ones that glowed so brightly, so ferociously, that their light was visible from between Ho's fingers. Still distracted, Maul leapt up and he charged Ho. He would deal with the vermin prince later. He would deal with all of them. He would grind their bones to dust, and he would bathe in their thin, watery, craven blood. Still distracted, he charged Ho, without thoughts of strategy or of tactics, without thoughts of what he would do when he reached the old man, without thoughts of the spear he still clutched in his hands. And as Maul, screaming, tore toward him, Ho lowered the spear, and he drove it home. That blackened spearhead struck Maul in the center of his chest, and it drove deep, aided not only by Ho's secure stance and sinewy arms, but by the reckless charge of Maul himself. The head of the spear cut, mercifully, into Maul's chest. It dug deep, mercifully, and Maul's heart mercifully stopped. Maul stopped. His charge stopped. His breath stopped. His hate stopped. everything stopped for one interminable, pregnant moment as the veins of that blackened spear flared up and that riotous flame contained within them reached into Maul's core, reached deep into the center of his being, and found something familiar, something that the flames recognized. They found themselves within him, and then they reached out, up and down, left and right, on all four diagonals. That cathartic flame spread throughout Maul's motionless, breathless, lifeless body, and he was reanimated. He was resurrected. He was made not whole, but made as he wanted him, as he had always wanted him. He was consumed and defined by the horrible, flaming, spinning, 8-armed star. Maul flew back, flew off of that horrible, dread, blackened spear, and he smashed into the altar that had once held it. Dazed from the cat beast attacks, from his guilt, from his anguish, from his agony, from Master Ho's mercy blow, his hand crept up to the gaping wound in his chest, to the gushing hole in his torso, the one that would finally be the end of him, the one that would send him careening into the inky black void of nothingness. But he found nothing. He found nothing. He found no wound. He found no injury on his chest. He found no injury on his entire body, though he was still coated in that thick, crimson gore. The wounds that it had poured out of had all been healed. They had gone away. They had been cauterized and closed by that awful, cathartic flame, and once again, Maul's vision filled with that horrible, rictus grin, and his ears filled with that horrible, grating voice. No, I am not yet done with you, Maul. Maul's one eye cleared of its horrifying, prophetic visions. His look at what the future held, not just for him, but for all the sundered worlds. It receded, having shown Maul what he needed to know, what he needed to see. It gave way to the real world, the world of smoke and shadows. And Maul, his mind, though it was still shattered, it was once again clear, or as clear as it could be, and he once again found himself looking upon Master Ho, who stood above him, amazed at Maul's instantaneous recovery, at his miraculously healed wounds, but he still held the spear before him, its pulsing black head hovering directly over Maul's chest. If you kill us, you will never make it back to your realm. Master Ho spoke slowly and deliberately as that corrupted, twisted regent, the vermin prince, hobbled across the room, dragging his ruined left leg behind him, wiping the crimson gore from his face to better look upon the queen of the elves, Enlith, in her frozen prison. Maul stared at the old man. He looked deep into those bright green eyes, and he allowed a vicious, rictus grin to stretch across his face as he realized that he was right to have brought Ho along, that what he had seen in the old man, it was indeed there, lurking, waiting, just beneath the surface. I'm not stupid. Disgusted Maul shoved the head of the spear aside, and he clambered to his feet. Without acknowledging Ho again, he turned to the vermin prince, who still stood by Enlith, keeping his distance from the destroyer. The witch is dead. My part is done. Maul began to stalk toward him. Now, use your foul magics and send me home. But before the vermin prince could respond, a thunderous cracking exploded from outside the tower, with tremors so powerful they shook that degraded, crumbling, failing tower at its foundations, casting all three men down to the ground, where they struggled to hang on, though they knew not to what, struggled to not be cast off of that realm, to be sent into the coursing chaos that surrounded each of the sundered worlds. They struggled to maintain what little security they had as the world shook and trembled around them. The explosion soon gave way to screams, to howls, to murderous cries, to the shedding of blood and the pounding of hooves and the grinding of gears. The three men, as different as they were, as varied as their hungers and desires were, they pushed themselves to their feet in unison, and they rushed out the door of that darkened room, the one with the walled-up, covered windows. They rushed to the hallway and into an adjacent chamber as the tower continued to shake and to spasm around them. They drew close to a window, and they looked out in horror, in fright, in blood-chilling terror. They looked out upon the fallen walls of Ravenna, the shattered and broken wall of tears, and they looked out upon what came through it. An endless horde of bloodied, frenzied centaurs. And the cataclysmaton. Thanks for listening to the very best episode of SKALD yet. Unfortunately, for the second week in a row, there are no new SKALD reviews on iTunes. That is, frankly, ridiculous. Thousands upon thousands of you download the show every week, and yet there are currently only 51 reviews. If you haven't done so yet, please head to iTunes, search for SKALD, click on reviews, and then leave one of your own. Doing so gets the show seen by more people, and it ensures that the only story that matters can keep going forever. Plus, if you leave a good one, I'll read it on the show. Also, in case you don't follow me on social media, you totally should. I'm Aubrey Sitterson on all platforms. I wanted to give you a heads up about something awesome. I'm currently in the midst of putting every episode of SKALD up on a dedicated YouTube channel, with a new episode going live every single day. It's a great way to re-listen to the show in a new format, or, at the very least, give me a bunch of likes and nice comments to, once again, help more people find out about SKALD. Head to aubreysitterson.com for links, or just search for SKALD on YouTube. Every week, SKALD comes to you courtesy of my Patreon supporters. People who went to patreon.com/SKALD and signed up to support the show with a small monthly donation. Because of their support, SKALD's hosting costs are completely paid for. But I can't say the same for the time involved with creating the show and the opportunity costs that come with working on it. If you dig SKALD, join the smart, generous folks who ensure that I can keep doing it into the future. Go to patreon.com/SKALD today. For more information on me, the SKALD Prose volumes, my comic book writing, signed copies of my work, my wrestling talk show Straight Shoot, my bio, contact information, social media, and more, head to aubreysitterson.com. Finally, my weekly recommendation. Embrace yourself, because it's a self-serving one. It's the G.I. Joe Revolution one-shot, written by me, with amazing art by Yanni Milniani and Lovern Konzerski. Now, because I record these episodes so far in advance, this issue has actually been out for a while. But don't fret if your local comic shop doesn't have it in stock anymore, because you can follow the link in the description of this video to go pick up a digital copy. This is kind of a zero issue for G.I. Joe, tying into the big Revolution crossover, which involves not only Joe, but also Transformers, Mask, ROM, and Micronauts, while also setting the stage for the new ongoing series by me, Yanni, and Lovern, launching on December 28th. This is a massively big deal for me, and it's the type of freelance work that will not only help subsidize my work here on SKALD, but also help get more attention on the show. If you like my storytelling here, you're going to love G.I. Joe. If for no other reason than that for the first time, there's a Transformer on the G.I. Joe team. Yeah, you heard that right. Go pick it up today. Thanks for listening. I'll talk at you next week.